the recall that wasn't a command. The empire of Aurelian was not ruled by fear. It was ruled by devotion. White marble cities climbed the hills like offerings to the sun. Banners of imperial black and gold rippling over blood-won borders. The court sang praises of peace while its armies sharpened blades at the edges of the world. And at the very center of it all sat Emperor Xerxes, Enigma king, beloved tyrant, adored lunatic, who ruled not by crushing his enemies alone, but by loving far too deeply, especially one man. Valerius Aurelian, Alpha General of the Western Wards, was not summoned back to the capital. He was celebrated. The decree arrived at dawn, sealed in molten gold and perfumed faintly with roses. An insult Valerius noticed immediately. He read it once in silence, then again, slower. By the third time, his jaw was clenched so hard the scar at his cheek pulled tight. Pillar of the Empire. Living symbol of conquest. Protector of the realm. His battalion, his wolves, were granted land, pensions, bloodline honors that would echo for generations. All contingent on one thing: Valerius's presence at court. Not as a general, but as a recognized territorial bond to the emperor. The blade hid neatly in the fine print. Only an alpha who submits to an enigma's claim may be crowned imperial consort. There was no execution order, no threat of death. Xerxes was far too clever for something so crude. Instead, refusal meant erasure. The battalion disbanded, titles stripped, veterans scattered to hostile fronts where honor would not shield them. Their shared legacy, built in blood and bone, reduced to a footnote. Xerxes never threatened Valerius's men. He threatened what Valerius loved. And so the Alpha General rode for the capital with fury in his bones and steel on his back. Xerxes felt him long before he arrived. Enigmas always knew when what they loved crossed into their territory. The palace was awake, courtiers whispering, servants scurrying. But Xerxes dismissed them all. He sent the crown away, slipped out of his shoes, let the marble cool his bare feet as he stood on the throne dais like a lover waiting at the edge of a bed. He breathed in. Valerius's scent bled through the halls, iron and sun-warmed leather, smoke and battle and something stubbornly alive. Red. Always red. Xerxes smiled, soft and unguarded. My red rose, he thought fondly. The name had started as a joke. Valerius bathed in blood on the wards. Enemy blood, traitor blood, the red of war. Xerxes, on the other hand, loved roses. Grew them obsessively, bred darker varieties in secret gardens until they were nearly black. A rose soaked in red. Perfect. When Valerius finally stormed into the throne room, armored and furious, the court collectively held its breath. The Alpha looked like war-given form. Cloak torn, gauntlets still stained, sword at his hip like an accusation. His glare swept the marble hall and landed squarely on the dais. On Xerxes. Barefoot, unarmed, smiling like this was a reunion long overdue. Valerius didn't bow. Explain, he snapped, slowly, before I forget your emperor. The court flinched. Xerxes lit up. Gods, he loved that tone. I told them I loved you, Xerxes said gently, stepping down from the dais. His scent unfurled, not aggressive, not sharp, but thick and heavy, the kind that wrapped instead of struck. They insisted I prove it. Valerius laughed, sharp, incredulous. So you bribed my battalion and called it romance? I protected them, Xerxes corrected, stopping an arm's length away, close enough that the Alpha could feel the warmth of him. I made them untouchable, immortal in a way. That's love too. This is coercion. Xerxes tilted his head, studying him with open adoration. No, this is courtship. You're just used to uglier methods. The empire watched its emperor gaze at a man like the world narrowed to a single heartbeat. Xerxes had always been like this, obsessed, territorial, disastrously sincere. He ruled a kingdom that laughed at his excesses and feared his devotion in equal measure. Ministers whispered that the emperor would burn the world for one Alpha. They were right. Valerius felt the scent then, creeping into his lungs, curling along his spine. Enigma pheromones, dark, velvety, claiming without touching, He bristled. Call off the decree. Xerxes' smile softened, almost sad. I can't. Won't. I won't, Xerxes agreed cheerfully. Because you're mine, and the Empire finally knows it. Valerius leaned in, voice low and lethal. You're playing a dangerous game, Your Majesty. Xerxes leaned closer still, eyes bright with unhinged affection. I've always preferred dangerous games, especially with wolves. Somewhere in the capital, roses bloomed darker, and the Empire realized, too late, that its emperor had never recalled a general. He had claimed his red rose, and he would not let it go. Chapter 2. The Territorial Enigma. Valerius did not agree to marriage easily. There were arguments that shook marble columns, shouted refusals that echoed down palace corridors, and one memorable incident involving a ceremonial sword thrown hard enough to embed itself inches from the imperial throne. The court learned quickly to clear rooms when the Alpha General raised his voice. Xerxes never raised his. He waited. That, more than anything, unnerved Valerius. Because the emperor did not chase like a desperate lover, he endured like something ancient and inevitable. He let Valerius rage, let him threaten abdication, exile, even assassination, and through it all, Xerxes remained constant, devoted, certain. In the end, Valerius said yes not because he was broken, but because he was outmaneuvered by affection sharpened into strategy. The wedding was imperial excess at its most unhinged. Black and gold banners, rose petals dark as spilled wine, an Enigma Emperor smiling like he had already won every future argument. When Xerxes placed the collar around Valerius's neck, solid gold, etched with the imperial seal, the court gasped. Valerius lifted his chin and let it lock. If he was going to be claimed, he would not bow. Xerxes looked like he might cry from happiness. Xerxes did not chain his queen. He claimed him. Every morning began the same way. Valerius would wake to silk sheets, warm sunlight, and Xerxes already there, barefoot, unguarded, eyes soft with worship that bordered on lunacy. The ritual was never rushed. Xerxes would guide Valerius back against silk-draped pillars, hands firm but reverent, and scent mark him slowly. Pulse points, throat, jaw, the sensitive hollow beneath the ear. Not rough, not hurried. Territorial, absolute. By the time Valerius left the chambers, he smelled so deeply of the emperor that the palace guards averted their eyes and alphas in court instinctively bristled, some lowering their heads in submission, others retreating outright as their instincts screamed, claimed, claimed, claimed. Armor vanished from Valerius's life. In its place, Xerxes dressed him like a declaration of war. Translucent silks clung to scarred muscle. Gold chains weighed down his wrists and waist. Rings adorned fingers better suited for blades. And always, the collar. Heavy, high, unavoidable. A reminder. Valerius coped the only way he knew how. By being unbearable. You know, he drawled one morning, eyeing the silks with disdain, most emperors conquer kingdoms. You just conquer bedrooms. Xerxes beamed. Efficient use of resources. He called Xerxes fragile for needing to scent him daily. Called him desperate for watching him eat. Called the throne room a very expensive kennel, within earshot of at least 6 ministers. Xerxes never reprimanded him. He only smiled, slow, delighted, voice low enough to send shivers down spines. You can snarl all you like, General. It only reminds me that I've captured a wolf, not a lapdog, and I've always preferred the hunt. The court watched in mounting horror as their emperor's devotion tipped from eccentric into unmistakably unhinged. Xerxes attended councils with Valerius on his throne arm. He dismissed ambassadors for looking too long. He scented the air when another alpha spoke out of turn. And after the wedding night, after the enigma marked his red rose completely, there was no pretense left. Their consummation was not a singular event but a constant, a rhythm, a claim renewed again and again behind closed doors. Xerxes loved Valerius with the reckless intensity of an enigma who had never learned moderation and never intended to. He was obsessed, territorial to the point of comedy. hopelessly, disastrously in love. Valerius would complain, loudly, about being spoiled, smothered, claimed within an inch of his sanity. And Xerxes would only laugh, press a kiss to the collar, and murmur, "My red rose blooms best when guarded." The empire had gained a queen, and its emperor? A lovesick fool who would burn the world before letting his alpha go. Chapter 3. The Jealous Court and the Breaking Point. The court of Aurelian had always been ambitious, but after Valerius became queen, ambition curdled into something uglier. There were ministers who smiled too widely and bowed too deeply. Men who had once paraded their daughters in silks through the palace halls, dreaming of an Enigma Emperor who might lift their bloodlines into eternity. Xerxes had ignored them all, eyes fixed on a scarred alpha who wore gold like a challenge. They hated Valerius for that, and so they struck where Xerxes was blind. Not at politics, not at power, at Valerius's body. The change was subtle at first. Wine that tasted faintly wrong. Incense that lingered too long in the lungs. Court sessions where Valerius found himself slower, just a fraction. His temper dulled, his alpha edge blunted like a blade wrapped in velvet. He noticed immediately. Valerius had survived battlefields soaked in blood. He knew when something was wrong with his body. Xerxes did not. Because Xerxes trusted the palace, trusted the court, trusted that no one would dare touch what was his. That was their mistake. Valerius endured for days, teeth clenched, sarcasm biting harder than usual to cover the weakness crawling under his skin. He snapped at ministers, mocked rituals, nearly drew steel during a council meeting. Xerxes laughed it off at first, until he didn't. The moment came at dawn. Xerxes reached for Valerius out of habit, meaning to scent him before the day began, and froze. The alpha's scent was wrong. Muted, faded, tainted by something artificial. The palace learned what apocalypse looked like that morning. Xerxes' power surged, violent, suffocating, absolute. He tore through physicians, servants, and ministers alike until the truth spilled from trembling mouths. Names were spoken. Motives confessed. They wanted him gone. They wanted their daughters crowned. They thought an alpha could be replaced. By nightfall, the execution platform was raised in the central court. The punishment was public, educational. Xerxes sat upon the throne. Valerius pulled firmly into his lap, arms wrapped around the alpha's waist as though anchoring him to the world. Xerxes' scent flooded the square, heavy, territorial, feral enough to make hardened nobles weep before they begged. Valerius struggled once. "Don't," he hissed. "Don't make me part of this." Xerxes only tightened his hold, pressing his mouth to Valerius's neck in a gesture so intimate it felt obscene before the screaming crowd. "Watch," Xerxes murmured softly. "This is what I do to anyone who mistakes your body for common property and tries to hurt my red rose." The executions were swift, merciless, final. Valerius was shaking, not from fear but rage, at the blood, at the manipulation, at the horrifying clarity that dawned with every falling body. Xerxes would destroy the world and call it protection. When it was over, when the square was silent and stained, Valerius realized something worse than all of it. Through every scream, every plea, every death, Xerxes had never once looked away from him. Not at the condemned, not at the crowd, not at the blade, only at Valerius. As if the entire empire existed merely as a backdrop for his devotion. And suddenly, Valerius understood. This had not begun with the decree, or the marriage, or the collar. Xerxes had loved him since the first report from the western wards, of a general who bled red enough to dye the battlefield and still stood smiling. A rose growing where it should not. A wolf who refused to kneel. A red rose worth guarding at any cost. Valerius closed his eyes, fury twisting painfully with something far more dangerous. Because for the first time, he wasn't sure where obsession ended, and love began. Chapter 4. The General and His Shadow. The impossible did not announce itself gently. It arrived as silence. As Valerius standing very still in the palace infirmary, one scarred hand braced against marble, the other curled into a fist as physicians whispered and refused to meet his eyes. An alpha did not carry life. And yet, the court dissolved into chaos within hours. Scholars argued until their voices broke, priests whispered heresy behind closed doors, ministers panicked over bloodlines, succession, and what this meant for the empire's laws. Xerxes? Xerxes was radiant, utterly, terrifyingly undone. He laughed once, soft, disbelieving, and then dropped to his knees in front of Valerius, pressing his forehead to the alpha's stomach with reverence usually reserved for gods. "My red rose," he whispered, voice trembling. "You made me a miracle." Valerius threatened murder daily after that. The pregnancy was an experience. Valerius hated the nausea, despised the aches, and nearly strangled a court physician for calling him delicate. His temper sharpened even as his body softened, and Xerxes hovered like a lovesick shadow, adjusting pillows, monitoring meals, scenting him obsessively whenever stress spiked. It was ridiculous. It was suffocating. And, God's help him, it was comforting. When news came of a new enemy rising on the borders, Valerius knew before Xerxes said a word that the emperor would refuse him. And he did. "No," Xerxes said calmly, already planning annihilation. "I will end it myself." Valerius argued. Xerxes refused. So Valerius did the unthinkable. He begged. It was quiet, private, no court, no witnesses, just an alpha general, 4 months pregnant, gripping the emperor's robes and asking, not commanding, to be allowed to fight one last war. Xerxes broke. Valerius returned to the battlefield not in plate, but silk. His belly was visibly swollen beneath a pale tunic. His face bore old scars and new resolve. The command baton in his hand snapped through the air with lethal precision, strategy unfolding from his lips like prophecy. The army knelt, not out of fear, out of awe. 10 paces behind him walked Xerxes. Always 10. Close enough to shield, far enough to obey. He did not look at the enemy. He watched Valerius instead, held a silk-tasseled umbrella to keep the sun from his skin, carried chilled fruit, his power coiled and waiting. When an arrow strayed too close, the world ended. Xerxes' Enigma power tore through the front line in a display so absolute, it would be studied for centuries. Valerius didn't even turn. He wiped sweat from his brow, exhaled, and snapped without looking back. "If you're done committing war crimes, Your Majesty, I want a grape." Xerxes smiled and placed one in his hand. The war ended that day. The birth came months later. It was hard, painful, terrifying. Xerxes never left his side, hands shaking as he whispered encouragements, scent thick with devotion. When the child finally cried, strong and furious and alive, the emperor wept openly. A son. They named him Aurelian Rosethorn, a prince born of war and impossible love. Life after was quieter. Not peaceful, never that, but softer. Valerius learned the strange, grounding rhythm of domestic life, pacing halls with a fussy infant, snapping orders while rocking a cradle, scolding Xerxes for being an overprotective menace. Xerxes learned restraint, a little. He still watched Valerius like the sun might dare steal him, still hovered, still adored him with dangerous intensity. But now, when Valerius leaned back against him at night, child asleep between them, it felt less like captivity, and more like home. The empire survived. The general stayed. Not because he was broken, but because the Enigma loved him. Hook or crook? Until the Alpha chose to remain, red rose rooted deep, blooming where no one thought it could.